You're in the rant hole where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get a rant by becoming one of those people. This rant comes from Basil, who wants me to rant about Gaina making Alki-Uru and a new Gunbuster, and whether or not the Gainax spirit has disappeared from the anime industry. Which I would say it hasn't at all. I think that the Gainax spirit is alive and well in most of the studios that have come out of Gainax. I mean, if you look at Studio Trigger, I would say that the attitude of their work is very similar to the Gainax work attitude. I mean, obviously, Imaishi is still sort of the lead director at the studio. He's still making the same kind of shows he was making back at when he was at Studio Gainax. You've got Little Witch Academia, which is very much in the spirit of something Gainax would have done. In fact, they did another show about sort of a witchery school. Well, it was a princess school, and they did Petite Princess Yusie. Or Yushi? I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. Whatever the case, they are still doing stuff that's in the tradition of what Gainax was trying to do, I think. Especially the fact that Little Witch Academia feels so old school, and it has so much attention put into visual detail and art design and things like that. Things that Gainax was always sort of at the forefront of in my mind. So, Trigger, it feels like Gainax 2.0. It definitely feels like it's got most of the same blood running through its veins. Then you've got Gaina, and it's hard to say much about them yet because they haven't done that much, but I mean, Piano no Mori feels pretty in line with the kind of things that Gainax was doing, especially in their early days. I think the fact that some of the, people who were more in charge of the studio earlier on are now at Gaina, it has something to do with that trajectory. Yeah. It's basically a legacy manga adaptation that is, somewhat pretentious, even though it also is somewhat rambunctious. And the fact that they put so much effort into things like the quality of the music performances and getting all the nuances of them correctly is I don't know. It's definitely not just like something Gainax would have done, but I think if you had told me Gainax made it, it wouldn't have been a huge shock. And then they've got stuff like Hulaing Babies, which is about as Gainax feeling as it gets. It's like a really out there, visually driven, clearly like a one person's vision kind of project. So, yeah, if anything, I'm surprised how much of the Gainax spirit is alive in Gaina. Because Gainax itself has not really had much of that spirit anytime recently. But, if you look at, say, Studio Kara and what they've been doing, also, post-Gainax people who I think are keeping the spirit alive as well. You've got stuff like Dragon Dentist and the Animator Expo that, if you go beyond just fixating on the Ava Rebuild movies, there is still great things coming out of that studio too, and stuff that, again, represents exactly what I think Gainax had wanted from the industry. So if anything, it's almost like we're getting more Gainax than ever before. It's just that it's kind of all over the place and unfocused, and I think a lot of people miss the forest for the trees when they talk about these studios. When people talk about Trigger and they're like, I didn't like, I didn't like, let's say, Darling in the Franxx and Gridman, so therefore Trigger is dead. And it's like, well, did you watch Shikabane Hime? Or did you watch Dentalia no Shoka? These aren't even bad shows. They're just not ones that people remember Gainax for. Hanamaru Kindergarten, those are more Gainax even than some of the ones they did before that, like Mahoromatic or This Ugly Yet Beautiful World. All these Gainax shows that people just don't really think of when they think about Gainax. But it's not unusual for Gainax to make shows that don't perfectly encapsulate the identity of the studio, even if they do still have a lot of hallmarks of it. And Trigger is the same way. Darling in the Franxx, as I called it, was Trigger baby mode, or if you look at Gridman, if you look at even the stupid fucking light novel adaptation they did a few years ago, all of those still have trademarks of the company. So it's not as if those are suddenly a death spell for the identity of Trigger / Gainax. As for, first of all, with Blue Uru, I don't believe it's gonna actually happen. Like, I'll believe it when I see it. This thing has been in production hell for like 30 years. I can't believe they're still trying to get it done. You always hear like weird news about it, and I just don't like until I have seen like production artwork or like pieces of animation. I'm not going to be convinced that it's going to happen, and even then, like, there are Gainax projects that didn't get off the ground in the early 90s that have animation and production art for them out there that you could find that don't exist. So, like, until the movie is out, I'm not going to really have faith that this movie is actually happening. As for a third Gunbuster, I don't know how to feel about it, because when it comes to Gunbuster versus Diebuster, and even then there's like almost 20 years between them. At the very least, Gunbuster was like the directorial debut of Hideaki Anno, and then Diebuster is helmed by his direct protege, Kazuya Tsurumaki. So like, there's this sense of a torch being passed, that even though these shows are very different and they complement each other, and there are definitely people who like one and not the other for both shows. There's people, everybody has like a favorite, but like, I think that it was a logical decision to have this guy's, literal protege make a sequel to his show, which is, it's an interesting idea, and there was a lot of great talent brought into it. Kunihiko Ikuhara directed, I think, a whole episode of that. There's all kinds of people who were part of the original production, people who are friends with Gainax and the people at there, and people who've been working at the company for a long time all contributed to this. If they make a third one, is anybody who was truly relevant to it going to be there? I don't know. I don't know what kind of connections they're going to pull on. I don't know who's going to be involved. I, obviously fear that we'll end up with something like Fully Coolly Progressive, which I think is a god-awful abomination. But, that's what Production IG did, and it's not surprising to me that Production IG did that, because they milk their franchises. That's what they do. If they have IPs, they drive them into the ground, they keep them going as long as possible. So, like, I don't know if Gaina will take the same approach that they did, but, one can only hope that we end up with something good and not just a bastardization of an IP that I don't even know if it has the strength as an IP to, like, deserve to come back again. But we'll see what happens. If it's good, it's good. That's my new motto.